Well, my name is David, and my wife and I are connected for some 30 odd years to this community. It's our church, it's our spiritual home.
My name's Jess Medlock. I'm an old scholar of King's. I graduated in 2009, and so now we just come along to playgroup. I went to King's right from reception through to year 12. And so now it's like deja vu being back again here with Austin and going to do the same thing all over again for the next 13 or so years, which is pretty exciting. And for us, it just feels like home in a sense.
Well, I'm Russell Ely, principal of the school, and I've been here at King's since 1996. And I've been at King's Baptist Church, or Golden Grove Baptist Church, Tea Tree Gully Baptist Church for many years now. What I love about the King's community is that blend of church and school working together.
My name's Rebecca Riddle. I'm connected to the King's community by two kids that are in primary school. I've also taken my younger son to the King's playgroup, and I personally do a fitness group that's run next to the King's Church. Right from the start, when my kids joined the school, I really did feel right from the start that I was part of the community.
Hi, I'm Joy Han. I attended King's Baptist Grammar School from year 6 to 12. I started attending King's Baptist Church last year, and I am the current youth and worship intern. The King's community, I guess, as a school was just a good place for me to grow up in my Christian faith, and as the church, I guess, the congregation has sort of been my second family.
My name's Mike, and I'm one of the pastors here at King's Baptist Church, and it's good to see all of you here. And today I would like to talk to you about storytelling, and in some senses tell a story or parts of a story. So let me frame it up for you this morning by letting me tell you what I'm going to tell you about. Is that all right? I'm going to tell you about Jesus, because Jesus is where all good stories start. And I'd like to talk to you not just about Jesus, but Jesus in relation to the fact that we are here, and so here we are. And so why don't you just turn to the person next to you and say, here we are. Just in case they don't realise that yet at this stage. I'd also like to talk about some simple mathematics, and that is, according to Mike, and that mathematical equation is that the church equals people. Let's say that to the person next to you as well. The church equals people. Yeah, well done. And those people are us. Yeah, well done. You're getting the hang of this game. Well done. Us. It's good. And after I talk about those things, I would like to bring you a decent proposal. A decent proposal. Get it? Never mind. It's a bit of a joke to myself. But my sincere hope is for all of us that are here this morning, and there is a real sense of unity and excitement and togetherness. So thanks for being here this morning. For the possibilities that are before us for the next part of this story, I'm convinced that we will have a sense of genuine, united excitement after this morning about what the Lord has for us. But I also realise that for those of us whom some of this will be new information, you know, you may have expected or wanted just a nice glass of water, and today might feel more like you're taking a drink from a fire hydrant. So that is just to say that this message actually begins a 4-week sort of season, a season of 28 days in a lead up to a church meeting where we will actually bring you a motion, a proposed vote as a church board. And we're going to have 4 weeks, 28 days to pray, to talk, to ask questions, to listen, to discern what it is that God is saying to us together. And in all sorts of ways that I'll get to, this will be sketched out in terms of how you can be involved But this is just to say that even this Sunday, as exciting as it is, as sort of a marker in the sand, forms part of a much bigger story, a good news story. So, who's excited about that? Who's excited about that? There we go. Come on. Let's get a little bit Baptist-costal or something like that, hey? It's important that if we realise we're going to talk about the shape of life together as a Christian community and the telling of a story, then we need to talk about the author of that story, who also happens to be the author of life. And that author of life said, "I have come that you may have life and have it to the full." So the question is, what is a full life? And where do we find one? Well, as you can see, that life is actually our sort of first of three value words that we've been exploring. And this is to express that we believe that only one life has the capacity for a life to the full, and that is life in Christ. So it's important to realise that our beginning point for this story is Jesus. It needs to be said up front that Christ's love and lordship is our foundation for belonging to both him and to one another. And it's that lordship that even now, 2 millennia after Christ sent his disciples out on the Great Commission, that here we are. Just to remind each other, turn to the person next to you and say, here we are. This is where we are. Following this Jesus together, this Jesus we proclaim, by virtue of his life and death and resurrection as Lord, we are here we are, following Jesus. And so indeed, before we move toward presenting what the boards of the church and school in partnership together are proposing that we do, let's talk about the reality of these three words. They're three words that make a short sentence that we've said enough already, but they're actually words that bear some exploring in terms of thinking about what it is that we're doing. Let me talk to you about here. It would seem to go without saying that here is not just anywhere. Here is not there. Here is here. This place, not some other place. And when thinking about this, I realised it might be helpful from this point on to talk about some definitions for what is going to be spoken about this morning. So I want to talk about and realise that I mean some different things by the word place. Place is, as far as this message is concerned, the northeast of Adelaide. Place is Windvale. Place is our neighbourhood. Place is your neighbourhood. But when I speak about space or spaces from here on in, I'm speaking about this physical space, this space that you are in, that we are in together this morning, that we gather in weekly, that this space that facilitates our ministries. But when I talk about the church, I'm talking about people, real people, us people. People that are here, and perhaps people as well that aren't here yet. People that perhaps aren't born yet. I think that it's significant to say this, that a church is made up of people. Because churches have this funny habit of using big catch-all words to describe things. They use the word even church or ministry or program. And it's worth stating that the church is people. And I think a lot about and pray a lot for the people of this church, as do all of the other pastors, our board. And that's why this year I did this in my office. I put up a big whiteboard and put everybody's name on a magnet and put them on the board. Just to remind myself that when you think about, pray for, lead, do something together with people, it wraps together stories of many, many people's lives. And this isn't done in the same sort of way that a football coach puts magnets up on a board and shifts them around to achieve the objectives that they want. It's just to recognise that each and every person who is part of this community is part of a big story together. That's the together story that sits on the whiteboard, but each person brings their own unique part to that story. One pastor said that it's the pastor's job to recognise that people are not a problem to be solved, but that people are mysteries to be explored. And I think that's a lovely way of putting it. And so I just want to recognise that we are talking about people here, people with names, people with stories. So here we are. And as I said, while we're all individuals, we recognise that we are together today as well as part of a greater whole. And so I'd like to ask what it is that has brought you here today. And that's a surface level question to some extent. You might say, well, Mike, you harassed me with a text message, so I felt guilty enough to come. But I won't ask for a show of hands on that one. But I'm talking about on a deeper level than that too. Have you ever stopped to consider that of all of the sliding door moments that have taken up your life that could have you somewhere else, like Ceduna or Yunta or the Yukon or some other place, here you are, here we are. We recognise that we're here. Actually, just in case you've forgotten, turn to the person next to you and say, here we are. Yeah. You are here. Is everyone here? Yeah, you are here. You're looking at each other thinking, is this a trick question? I've always thought I was here. Maybe I'm having an existential crisis. I don't know. No, you are here, a human being in this place, in this space. I've used all our definitions there together, but you are here as an individual. But the reality is of church is that we belong here together as individuals and as an other. Turn to the person on the other side of you and say these words: you are an other. This is simply to recognise that as much as you are one individual person, fearfully and wonderfully made, as the Psalms express, so is the person that is sitting next to you on the right and the left. And that's why the third of our value words is this wonderful word, family. It's to recognise this fantastic mathematical truth, that the church is people, and the people of that church make up the family. And this is because what was first known as the ecclesia, the gathered people of Christ, gather together in the belief that we find our meaning and purpose as part of a greater whole, much more than we ever could as individuals. We acknowledge that we are far better off together than apart, even and especially with the complexities that life brings when you decide to buy into a community of faith together. And we do this because we believe that belonging to one another together brings more life, has more capacity to be a giving community and represent a family than we could ever do on our own. We tell a better story when we live out the reality that we are part of something together. The very reality of us living this message out day to day is one of the ways that the testimony of the church is lived out by its mere existence. It says there's a way of life that honours God and others before ourselves. It's a story of a body, of people who belong not just to themselves, but belong to one another. It's why we celebrate together, and it's why we grieve together. It's why Paul wrote famously in 1 Corinthians, he said, just as a body, though one has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. And it's that reality that has shaped the we in here we are. The we of this story, believe it or not, I don't know if you've stopped to think about this before, but the we of this story has been gathered and meeting together and doing life together as a faith community for over 150 years now in some way, shape or form. Here's a cool picture from an earlier part of that story where the we met together in this building up on North East Road. And in times gone past, this church has been a group of people who have followed Jesus together, practicing life together, and have over the years developed spaces in the places where they lived that were appropriate for the times and for the people whom were living their lives in worship of and following Jesus. And so we're thankful for the faithful people who have been part of this community. We are thankful for that rich heritage of the story, because as one poet said, that if you don't know where you come from, you'll have a hard time saying where you're going. And while I can't cover 150 years of history, and that's not really what we're doing this morning anyway, I do want to sort of move significantly forward in picking up that story in the mid-80s. Because not only is it from there that many of us are familiar with the story, it forms the chapter before the chapter that I hope that we're about to tell with one another. The story is a story that many of us have been a part of and have heard a lot about, and it is worth celebrating. It's a story where a number of people in that local church feel prompted by the Spirit that the way that God is leading them to live out their faith as salt and light at that time is to begin a Christian school here in the northeast of Adelaide. Yes, said some. That's it. What? Said others. What does a Christian school have to do with being the church? But as the story went, it's amazing to think that there was a time not long ago when King's Baptist Grammar School was actually just an idea. Isn't that crazy? Many of you would have been a part of the story and seen it actually transpire, that what was an idea and expressed in words through a wonderful story of love in action has taken on flesh and blood. And it's amazing testimony of God's goodness and faithfulness that King's Baptist Grammar School has grown and flourished as its vision of faith has come to see something exist and created that didn't only 3.5 decades ago. And so today, really what we want to do is to continue to build on that story of creativity. What is it now, and how is it now that Jesus is leading us? With full regard for the reality that we are here, and here we are. I was wondering if you could imagine with me what we'd like to call Vision of Faith, our next chapter. In fact, what I really want to do is invite you to do more than just imagine with me, because the truth is we've actually been imagining together for a long time now. You know, it's only about 1.5 years ago when we had a special Sunday and we renamed our church, King's Baptist Church, and began knitting the story of the church and school back together again. And I asked you to close your eyes and imagine with me a day in the life of the King's community. And after wrestling through what that might mean for quite some time now in prayer and with community consultation, and with enough light to live by, we being the boards of both the church and the school, and even with the in-principle approval of the Baptist churches of South Australia, have begun the imagining, the process of seeing words take on flesh in shapes and in a direction forward. And this is a morning about presenting that to you and inviting you as the members of the King's community to imagine your place within it. And I hope that everyone can see that everyone does have a place within it. And so I'll get there, I promise. We'll get there together, and Russell and Darren will share some of that this morning. But so what we'd like to do this morning is put to you a proposal that, like I said, after 4 weeks and 28 days of prayer and some Q&As and the time for reflection, that we might actually represent our belief in the priesthood of all believers, that we all have access to God as individuals and can hear God, and the members of the church will have a chance to vote on this proposal. And with that being said, if you are not a signed up member, we have applications available today. So you could conceivably, if this is your community, if this is your spiritual home, I'd encourage you to consider becoming a member. It's a great place to do life together. But the idea and the birth and move and subsequent flourishing of the school led the church, this church that had given life to that school almost 20 years ago, to begin a process that made sense but took a significant amount of time for the church community to move its spaces up here to the hill from Tea Tree Gully, with one of the primary objectives being to bring our gatherings, our ministries, into proximity with the school that the faith community had given birth to, and as stated, was now flourishing, but to geographically become neighbours on mission together. And so it makes a good time to mention, as I don't think I actually have to this point, but just some brief stats to give you a bit of a picture about what's actually going on today, up here day to day, not just on Sundays. But on a daily basis during the school term, I did just want to state that that in these spaces that we do ministry and do school in, we have many things happening by virtue of the sheer amount of people that are here. 1,000 plus students on campus every day, representing more than 660 families with more than 100 staff. It's just to say that it's a busy place. It's already, in a sense, a community hub. With the school, with playgroups, very popular with fitness groups, as we saw in the video, as well as all of the ministries that take place during the week as well. But even this current day-to-day reality doesn't highlight what's also worth thinking about, the incredible fruit that's been produced by this vision of faith. And while kingdom work is always hard to measure and evaluate, because I think kingdom work is the work of legacy. And as Alexander Hamilton said, legacy is planting seeds in a garden that you never get to see sometimes. And the fruit, the effect of the seeds that have been sown into the lives of literally thousands of people through the vision of faith of the school, it would be impossible to measure the way that this has shaped, flavoured and illuminated the world as followers of Jesus live out their lives as salt and light. But at least one indicator of the significance of King's values can be found in the fact that more than 25% of currently enrolled students come from the community of old scholars. So sometimes you do get to see that fruit. But when the church did finally move 12 odd years ago, the catch cry was moving on in faith, wasn't it? Who remembers that? A few hands there. And from what I hear, it was a wonderful time as vision was sought, discerned, prayed for. A substantial amount of money was raised. I got some photos of the building going up. And this, I know in the minds of many people from the community, was a wonderful time to recall because it represents what has always been a truth for the church and was embodied by this church then, and I believe is calling, that God is calling us to embody now. This wonderful truth, there's a couple more photos of the building there. This wonderful truth that the church has never been a building, the church is people. And this is why it's written in the New Testament. Peter said, "You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, not you are a chosen building, well constructed with economic use of materials." But this other truth as well, that the church, when at its best and in obedience to Christ and the Great Commission, is always in the process of moving forward. The community of faith has always been in the act of reimagining itself, reimagining the model by which it carries forth the mission of God. This isn't just the truth from the New Testament either. Even in the Old Testament, the Exodus, the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on." In the New Testament, Jesus set the wheels in motion when he said, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations." And go means, go, I think we can all have a shot at that. Go means, yeah, generally, yeah. Go means go. Go means go. And this is why even in the New Testament, after Jesus gave this great commission, there's this wonderful story from the book of Acts that while they were worshipping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work which I've called them." Then after fasting and praying, they laid their hands on them and sent them off. The church has always been a sending church, a creating church, because God is inherently creative. God loves to see his love expressed, lived to more people. And which people are we called as a people to love? Well, Scripture makes it pretty clear who that is. You might remember this old chestnut. Love thy neighbour as thyself. But throughout the story of Scripture, love thy neighbour just as you would love thyself actually takes shape in loving others perhaps even more than ourselves. And this is why Philippians, it says, look not only to your own interests but also to the interests of others. This is all just to say that what we're about to present is a direction where what's being proposed is being proposed with the best interest of everyone who calls this place and these spaces home. For we're all neighbours, and the church is for everyone who lives in this neighbourhood, who currently do or will come into this space and places throughout the 7 days of each and every week. We are all neighbours. So I'm not sure if I've said this yet, but here we are. Two healthy organisations that come from the same DNA, Jesus. Able to imagine what's the future going to be like together? What's the next chapter? How can it be shaped as best we can with all that we have where we are right now and for the future? That has the potential to create spaces and places for everyone and anyone who might be part of this community. So I'm going to ask you to consider this proposal about what we could do together as a church and school, as co-creators together, inspired by the neighbourhood and the needs around us and moved by the power of Jesus in the mystery of the Spirit to do this, to imagine the future for the others, whoever those others are, but also to imagine yourself as part of that community who has a place here with much to offer. And I invite you to, I hope, genuinely experience a refreshing work of creativity in your own heart. Now, it's worth stating as well that the King's community exists as it does, like it does, due to the incredible stewardship and good business management and wonderful generosity in many, many ways over many years from many people. And it's enabled us the freedom to imagine the future of this place together and the spaces that are in this place. But like any asset that anyone has, and recognising that all things are God's anyway, and in light of the story told to this point, the question is there for us as a group of people who have the ability to discern the voice of God together. What is the best use of this asset looking to the future? What does good stewardship look like in the months and years ahead? That provides for our families' needs now, but also opens up ways of doing life that are mutually beneficial to both organisations that occupy the space. And so there's many reasons why this first part of the presentation on what's to follow is perhaps best communicated by Russell Ely, who's been a key servant in seeing this story take shape over the last couple of decades as the principal of King's Baptist Grammar School. So I'd like to invite you up now, Russell, if that's okay.
Well, good morning, church, and thanks, Mike. As Mike said, my name is Russell, and it's been my pleasure just to share a few details with you on Vision Sunday. Mike, are you going to do the... oh, very good. Now, the site plan, even that's a little bit old, because you'd know on one of those tennis courts, netball courts, the one to the north, of course, there's now a new building. So, and next to that new building is a building with a green roof. That building with the green roof is the community house. And you might know that a little while ago, the school thought that the community house and the land that it sits on would be a great place for the school to venture into something called an ELC. Now, a little bit of background for that. In 2013, the school was 30 years old. And so we actually asked the question, has God finished with the vision of faith, or is there something more around the corner? And in a way, that was a rhetoric question, because of course, God has not finished with us as a school, and the vision of faith has new ways of presenting itself. And one of those new ways was to think of a way of serving 3- and 4-year-olds. That's an ELC, because the school actually only has 5-year-olds up. So a key way into the future was to build an ELC. And we looked around and we saw that in the whole area of Golden Growth, there are no faith-based ELC services. There's for-profit services, there's a DCD service, Keithcott Farm, but there's no faith-based service here in Golden Grove, Windvale and the surrounding areas. We thought there was demand for those services, and we certainly knew that government policies and financial support to families was increasing. So we saw an ELC as a new way for families to join the King's community. And it was really strange. We had to go to a community consultation for the community house, and when the newspaper rang me up and said, well, what does the school want to do with it? I said, well, we'd like to put an ELC there. And with that one word, the following day after the local paper was published, Chris started to receive phone calls about the new ELC. We hadn't even bought the land, we hadn't even got a plan. And did you know, right at the moment, there are over 100 families who's registered interest for an ELC, and we still actually don't quite own the land, do we, Darren? We're nearly there in getting that land. However, our thinking wasn't just to build any old ELC. We wanted an ELC to be a strong link, a church and ELC working together as strongly as it could be. You see, our heart was for the ELC to be a platform for ministry, for the church to connect with people, and for people who don't yet have a faith community, maybe, to connect with the church. How could we do that in the best way, to link people and church? Well, we do what organisations do. We formed a working party and we visited centres both here in Adelaide and interstate. I remember it was about March a year ago that a few of us were looking at some ELCs that churches actually ran over in Geelong. We went ahead with a master plan. I called it Master Plan Number 1. And it was to see how an ELC could be built on that patch of land which is shaded yellow on the map. Because that seemed logical. And yet, from that time through to about September, end of September last year, that master plan developed, but when it came to fruition, I just thought that there were some things that weren't resolved. There were some things that were missing, particularly the link between the ELC and the church. So with those unresolved matters, I wondered, well, what could we do? What should we do? We went back to the drawing board. And that has resulted in what we've called Master Plan 2, which was a joint effort, school and church, to try and think again about getting the link between the ELC and the church in the strongest way possible. And that's what we're presenting this morning. It's about how best to use land and spaces that Mike's already spoken about. Now, getting linkages clear is not just about a building. In a way, a space brings to life what we think church could be or what church can be. And our self-understanding of being church was clarified with a community consultation that was undertaken by the King's Working Party, and that resulted in what we might call several common threads. Now, you might remember those common threads, and again, if you've heard it before, thank you for your participation in answering surveys and putting sticky bits of paper on pieces of paper, and really appreciate that. And here's a paraphrase of what we as a community said we wanted for church being church. To be outward looking, to be an hospitable church. To take the ministry of the church outside of the walls of the church. To have something to offer the wider community beyond just the people of our church and our school. Something that would bring people to the church. And we wondered, well, what were some ways that this could occur? How could we make this happen? Well, here were some ideas of the how to. Well, establish a faith-based ELC. And as we've seen since that time, the school's discovered that there certainly is enough interest for that to be the case. Also, to establish a purpose-built cafe. A cafe that would have the capacity to build on and serve the community inside and outside of the school term and outside of the school hours as well. Perhaps providing what you might call a third place or a third space for people who aren't connected with a church community to build a connection with a King's community. We also wanted a purpose-built worship and performance space, a place that would represent the aesthetics of truth and beauty, in other words, a beautiful space, a gathering space that it encourages us to engage in worship and would be a place where we could invite people to engage in worship, a place desirable as certainly for old scholars, perhaps to get married as an old scholar in a church and the beautiful gardens around, a place for sacred occasions, but also a place that could be used during the week for chapel services as sub-schools, primary school, middle school, senior school, with room for parents too. Oh, if you could only have been here on the first day of school this year, the junior school R5 were gathered, parents were at the back, and I can tell you there were no room for anyone. And yet we've still got another year 4 to add and another year 5 to add. The primary school, junior school is not yet full. It's still growing. And in addition to chapels and worship and assemblies, what about the ability to house some of the musical or performing arts work that occurs at the school? Perhaps even the school musical production instead of heading down to the Shedley Theatre. So they were some of the thoughts on worship spaces and cafe and ELC, but there were more spaces for the existing community serving ministries to grow and flourish. Spaces for CareLink, for allied health services, for the LifeWell model. And a LifeWell model would be counselling and therapy services, allied health services. Well, that's what came back from church thinking about being church. And so with the school's background in mind, the way the school was seeking to serve new communities through an ELC, and the school's desires in mind, I'll hand back to Mike to talk about what that could actually look like. Thanks, Mike.
So what does it mean to move on in faith again? Well, after moving up here as a church and with the plan in mind, I believe that this auditorium was for use for worship until what was going to be known as stage 2, which was going to be out into the dirt car park originally. It was always thought that might be used for worship. But anyway, 12 years later, here we are. Have I said that yet? But can I ask you to consider the following? In light of who we are and where we are, what if the provision of meeting the community's needs with an early learning centre is not actually out there or over there, but it's actually perhaps right where you're sitting right now? I ask you to consider that perhaps this space, as you can see up here, this picture, as it currently is obviously what's represented, what's actually built right now. And I need to say that up front. That's what's built right now is this picture, in a sense. In terms of the other shapes that I'm going to add on to this, are concepts, not definitive or detailed design, but are concept buildings and representative of space. But these are the only ones that are obviously built. But consider that where you're sitting perhaps right now is actually maybe the best use of the space. It's a big, flat area with masses of easily accessible outdoor space. Not only that, but the reality too that with just a few slight modifications, we might be able to turn, or not slight, significant. Who am I kidding? We could turn the church building into an early learning centre, and the reality is that we would be capable of doing this and seeing it up and running within a year, which is really very exciting in terms of being able to meet a legitimate community need. All right. Okay, Mike. Let's turn the church into an ELC. What's next? A Ferris wheel? A wave pool? Actually, that's not a bad idea, Russell, to be honest with you. Moving along. But how about we provide for our community based on the strength of what we know in terms of where life happens these days, in terms of talking about moving the church outside of the walls and saying quite emphatically, we're here to serve you. Churches are always, healthy churches are always asking the question, how do we meaningfully engage with our communities? And we have this incredible gift of having our community quite legitimately coming day in, day out into this space. And so how about we think about bringing and building on and upscaling the ministry of our cafe so that it actually becomes a 7-day-a-week operation and becomes a front door for our community. A hospitable, welcoming, landmark building, the appeal of which says, I want to go there. Because let me ask you a question. Who has gathered with a friend for coffee in the last week? That's not a trick question. Hands up. Who's had coffee with a friend? Who's bought a coffee at a cafe? Well done. About half of us. The reality is that the coffee shop, this is where life happens these days. And we envisage this as a place that embodies the values of the King's community, a front door and a place of connection with some pizzazz, with appeal to the traffic of Windvale Drive and all who come up and go that street, a place purpose-built, commercially built, commercial grade, and able to operate independently of the church and the school and the hours they keep by virtue of the way that it's built. But a place that represents a welcome, hospitable connection, a place that represents the truth coined by sociologist Marcus McLuhan when he said that the medium is the message. The medium, a medium is the conductor, a transferer, a connector, the provision of space for the people of this neighbourhood to belong in and love being a part of. That's inviting, that is accessible, not just for us and those who have used it to this point, but with all those that actually come and use this place and space. And we're talking about cricket clubs and basketball and netball clubs and many others that are here throughout the week. It doesn't take away any of the potential of the cafe to continue to operate in much of the way that it has. But an added benefit to it is that a well-run, busy cafe, scaled up, has a significant capability to return an income stream for the use of ministry and mission aside from just tithes and offerings on a Sunday. Because, of course, let's not play pretend. Finances are a significant part of all this, and I know what some of you are thinking before I even get to the end of it. This is a nice idea, Mike, but how in the world are we going to pay for it? Well, I'm glad you asked. And I'll hand over to Darren in just a minute. But this is, but that is to say, there is a good way, an exciting way that, in its very essence, represents the beauty of partnership. But first, a bit more of the next chapter, a few more concepts for you to build on this, because I'd like you to think about the reality that we are committed to the provision of facilities that meet our needs. And this includes the recognition that church as a people, and people can move and will move, and we go ahead with this. There's no shirking the fact that there'll be a season of disruption and interruption. But it's important to recognise that part of the end goal, one of the end goals, is realising that sacred spaces have always been important to faith communities. And the synagogue and the temple in Jerusalem were certainly significant places for Jesus and the Jews. And at the heart of the spaces we want to create is a gathering space, a place where we continue to gather, where we wash in and wash out like the tide of the ocean, a place where we can pay attention to God in worship and the word, a place that's designed to create togetherness, a place designed to look and sound amazing, a place with the provision, I hope, of a baptistry. You know, we are Baptists after all. And actually, on that note, as the implied trust holders of any facility we build, our denomination, the Baptist Churches of SA, stipulates that whatever we would build would have the provision for ongoing worship gatherings. So, in fact, we can't just build apartments or a skating rink or a wave pool, unless we do worship in the wave pool, and that's an option, but no. I'd ask you to envisage a beautiful space for worship gatherings. And so in through the front doors of the auditorium, in through the foyer, past the cafe, be a gathering space designed to have a capacity up to about 500 people. We'll have provision as well for sectioning it off for smaller gatherings. Also be fitted out with effective furnishing so it can be used as a performance space, things like Russell referred to, the school musical. But of course, one of the main uses of this would be that it would provide the space for gatherings for junior, middle, senior school chapels. As Russell said, these are already at capacity. And I don't know if you've stopped to consider this, that kind of at the heartbeat of this facility, of a gathering space is this unique opportunity for us, because worship spaces are traditionally extraordinarily expensive to build and inefficient to maintain, not just because of materials and shape, but it's because that worship spaces on the whole don't get used a whole lot. They get used 1 out of 7 days. And it's actually part of the reason that Adelaide is now a city of empty churches. Dwindling denominations have trouble maintaining facilities, let alone maintaining their congregations. But in doing life together, we have the opportunity to build a facility that will be used most days during the year in some way, shape or form, and alleviating some of that financial strain. But again, more of those details from Darren. It's also worth stating that the heart of the provision for a designated gathering space, as I said, was always part of the original move up here from the gully. And these two people don't know this, but two of our folks from this congregation, who are both in their 8th decade of life, independently of the same week of one another a little while ago, said to me, "Mike, I don't really care how you do it, just get it done before I kick the bucket." I appreciate that sentiment, and I'm doing my best. But of course, any good facility needs spaces for other ministries, and that's why these multi-purpose spaces that you can see extending down here could be used and sectioned off for kids ministry down here. And there's a creche, it's a building of an extension of our current cubby as it's used, and the creche that's used for fitness and stuff like that. These are multi-purpose space where you'll see here providing for the ministries that already function and use big spaces like this that we'll need, such as Triple T on a Tuesday, which just has a wonderful ministry of pastoral care to a couple hundred ladies. It takes place on Tuesdays and has done for decades now. And folks, if you want to see love in action, please come up here on a Tuesday and see the way that Trish and Alison just love on the ladies of this community with their team. They do a fantastic job of that. But you'll also see here a connective space there in the corner over here, which is the closest proximity that this new facility has to the school. It's been designated as sort of youth and teenagers lounge, hangout, drop-in facility, whatever you want to call it. This is to say it'll be kitted out as a space for youth with who knows what, gaming consoles, couches, beanbags, equipped for a youth pastor and his team to engage in the discipleship of generations of young people, a hangout space. And so this is to recognise that as far as kids are concerned, not only is there provision of space for Sunday mornings, but the provision and extension of kids ministry in such a way as to see our kids ministry team wrap themselves around the community of families that will come to be part of this ELC. And obviously there are just some purely sort of more functional spaces that are required, and this red zone here is designed to represent office space. This is one option for office space. Another would be just continuing to use spaces that are still available on the ground floor, but it's to state the obvious that in the concept that we're proposing, it's not these exact shapes that we are proposing. Some of you are thinking, I don't like the idea of red offices, you know. It's the idea, you know, it's the vibe, it's Marbo. Thanks, I'll be here all week. This is to say as well that the provision for an upstairs or extended space on the ground floor allows us to think about wellbeing services of provision around allied health for the community, that we might continually represent the fact that we exist for those who are not members yet. And while the allied health and perhaps LifeWell model of things is the most unresolved as far as our thinking goes in terms of what it is that we're going to do compared to the research that we've done on an ELC or a cafe, we're excited for what could be continued to be developed for us as a whole community. So this is the exciting concept. At its heart, it's the question of how can we use this space in the best way possible as we invest in the future. It's with this on the horizon, this idea of wrapping ourselves as a faith community around the people of our neighbourhood with the love of Jesus. That's what we want to do. That's who we want to be. And at least in broad form, it's appropriate that Darren is able to share some of the business model that enable this to happen. So I'll hand over to him at this stage.
Thanks, Mike. Give me the easy bit. That's great. It's all good having fun, colourful pictures up there, Mike. That's good fun. But we do have to pay for it. And what you've just seen, we think will cost $6 million. So it's fair to say, as a church, we can't do that on our own. We actually couldn't do stage 2 on our own. We've been talking about stage. I was here with Moving On in Faith. I was part of that community that moved from Tea Tree Gully to here, and I'm still here. It's hard to believe that we are where we are now. We enrolled our eldest son, who is sitting down in the front row right now in King's Baptist Grammar School, when he was 2. And we didn't have a connection to the church at that point, and it was through that we had a connection at that point. I would never have believed that I'd be standing in front of you now talking about $6 million of buildings as a result of that connection with the school. But that's where we are. But this isn't about me, it's about us and who we could be. And there's only one way that I could get my head around doing this, and that's together. We can't do it on our own. And so that's what kept me up one night in October this year. And you know those nights where you can't sleep, and usually that's really annoying and you get frustrated. This was the total opposite. I couldn't sleep because I was so excited about what this could mean for us as a community. The only way we can do this is to invest. And that's what it would look like. That was my bad drawing, I suppose, but that's the concept, is that we would invest together, that we would invest as a church and we would invest as a school to bring to a reality something that couldn't happen without the two together. We couldn't do it on our own, and the school wouldn't want to do it on its own. It wouldn't make sense for it. Why would a school build a cafe? Wouldn't make any sense. Only makes sense when we draw in the church connection. And Russell's right. We went to Geelong last year and we saw churches doing ELCs on their own, and they were asking us how we make a connection between a church and a school. They hadn't quite figured that out yet. We're in a really unique scenario here with the school. Through the work that I do on Baptist Financial Services, it's a real privilege to serve on that board, I see lots of churches trying to do lots of things. What we're proposing here is actually quite unique. It very rarely happens that you would get two mature organisations trying to do something together. But the way to do it together is actually to create something that's not here yet. And the best way I can think of to do that is to create a new entity called the King's Community, something that actually does exist. It's not just some concept, but it's actually real. And we could create a community where we would invest our major asset, which is this building. I'm not talking about giving up our building, I'm talking about investing the building into something bigger. The school would invest some things. The school would invest the community house and the land that sits around it, and also some cash that would bring it up to around the same level as us. In fact, it probably will require more investment from the school than we were able to give from the church. That would get invested into a new entity, King's Community, that would own the buildings. But who are the owners of King's Community? It's the school and the church. We're not actually losing anything, we're investing. And through that, we would have assets of $5 million. The church is about $2.5 million. The school get put in $2.5 million. That's $5 million. And then we would be able to get a loan, and that we would be able to repay that loan through the activities that generate things. ELCs make money. They actually return a surplus. Cafes make money, they return a surplus. So we could create these things that would feed back into a King's Community, and through two parts becoming one whole, you can actually do something that you can't do on your own. You could get something that's $6 million that you couldn't do, you couldn't dream of doing as a church. But we could do it together if we combined our resources and do it together. And that's what we're proposing. So we're talking about 28 days now, and Mike will go into detail about what that 28 days looks like. But what we're actually proposing is that we would give approval to create a new entity, the King's Community, that would be jointly owned by King's Baptist Church, King's Baptist Grammar School, as the vehicle by which Master Plan 2 could be completed. So that's what we'll be voting on as a church in 4 weeks. We're encouraging you to engage in this process. Don't see it as a fait accompli, or that your questions aren't important, or that things are already decided and we've moved past. That's not the case. We need you to come with us. We need the whole community to come with us, because we can't do this on our own. And that's the real key message, that we need to do these things together. And so that's the way we could create something that would be unable to be created on our own. So thanks for listening, and Mike's going to just wrap it up with what the next 4 weeks looks like.
Just want to thank you for your attention this morning. I know it's a bit different. It's sort of got that feeling of, is this a church service? Is this a church meeting? Is it a election victory from the Liberal Party last night? Who knows what it is? No, this is to say that we recognise that this is a decision tree time for us as a community. Russell likes that expression, the decision tree, because it works a particular way. You make a decision and reality looks one way, and you make another decision and reality looks a different way. And as Darren said, we want to honour the way that we do life together as a community, and that's why we would love you to be a part of deciding what the future looks like. So I want to encourage you to do a few things as part of that. You'll receive one of these on your way out. It's a document. It's got some detail about the process. It's got some questions that I'm sure that you have that are answered, but it's also got details about what the next 4 weeks looks like, because as part of this document, we actually have a prayer calendar, and we want to be praying about this together, folks. This is where we believe God is leading us, but we need, as Darren said, this only works if we do it together, for sure. And from that, if you have questions, and many of you will, that's fantastic. Please bring those to the forums, the Q&A sessions on Wednesday, April the 4th in the evening, and Sunday, April the 8th after church. And attend special prayer meetings that we're going to have around this on Tuesday, March 27th and Monday, April the 9th. These are details that are outlined in this booklet as well. And then I'd also love it if you would like to vote. If you're a member, we'd love you to show up and to be part of that morning where we will vote on this. And like I said, if this is your spiritual home and you've not actually gone through the process of becoming a member, you are invited to do that. Folks, to finish this morning, I did some meandering with my imagination. And I did some imaginings in terms of what a day might feel like, or what life might feel like in the community in the future. But I want to be very clear and stating that this is not my vision of the future. It's just in imagining. And in that imagining, I would encourage you to imagine your place potentially in the future of the King's community as well. So this is how I want to close the service is you've had structures and you've had finances and you're going to get some papers. I think you're even going to get a fridge magnet. Who doesn't love a fridge magnet, hey? This really is politics, isn't it? But this is actually about engaging our heart and our mind and our collective soul as a church community in this. So if you are better able to focus by closing your eyes, I want to encourage you to do that now, or do whatever helps you center yourself and enjoy imagining yourselves as part of this generous, hospitable worshipping community who gather regularly. Sundays are important. It's exciting to imagine a dream fulfilled and imagine gathering for worship in a place built to do just that in. With the musical types, those gifted to do so, leading us with voice and instruments in song and prayer. It's exciting to imagine the first, but hopefully many baptisms taking place in the new facility, stating publicly that Jesus is Lord of their life. Perhaps you can imagine yourself welcoming your neighbours, friends, family, people you'd love to see come to know the Lord into this space where we pay attention to God in worship and the Word. Sure that some of you can imagine yourself in this space during the week too for school chapels, or maybe your teachers or parents, or coming to see your kids as part of a fantastic musical performance. You're excited as a parent or a volunteer to be part of the life that is being lived to the full in these places, in these spaces. Or maybe it's easier for you to imagine yourself as a neighbour to others in the nitty-gritty details of life, and so you can see yourself dropping your kids off at the ELC or at school. And by the way, you can imagine yourself loving the Kids Early Learning Centre, where these kids, where the values and stories of the kingdom are being lovingly communicated into kids' lives from the earliest of ages. And gosh, those staff members, they love the kids there. This is no ordinary ELC. The philosophy and values of the King's ELC, you can see these values taking shape as these precious people are loved in the way that Jesus said they ought to be loved. And indeed, families from the neighbourhood know that as part of their staffing model, a chaplain's employed to offer spiritual and pastoral care to the families. But maybe you're someone who can't fathom imagining just dropping kids off and heading off. So you imagine yourself shooting a text to a friend for a quick coffee because you know that friend is going through some stuff. And so you meet at the cafe to have a great coffee, and their service is fantastic and it's set up wonderfully, and you're able to duck in there and have a quick catch up for encouragement and prayer. Another friend lets you know they have actually teamed up with the managers of the cafe to begin nutrition classes for the community. They've been a real hit. You should come along. You promise to think about it while also thinking about going to the gym. Or maybe as part of the seniors community, you can imagine yourself doing some old things in new places. Maybe you can see yourself getting helpful assistance through the services provided by Allied Health or CareLink. Or maybe you're a teen and you love finishing school and heading up to the youth lounge for a game of Call of Duty before Bible study. I know it doesn't seem like these two things go together, but somehow they do. The youth pastor and a couple of other volunteers are there, keen to share some fun and hear about what's going on. Or maybe you're someone who has a real heart for people who are struggling, and so you've found yourself energised to help those just getting by on the fringes. And so Mondays are your special day because you gather with those who come to the table. And it's a special Monday as this ministry kicks off a year with a special meal at the cafe, followed by a course on financial literacy funded through CareLink. Or maybe you're anyone, part of the church community who sees and recognises that the church and school have built for the needs of the community now, but they've also built spaces for the future. And that's why if you've got a gift, a talent, experience, you're an artist, you're a florist, a writer, a poet, you're a builder, you're an accountant even, you're a specialist in speech pathology, or you run a men's shed for struggling men with mental health, or you run a women's book club, or you lead spiritual formation retreats, you're an expert in foreign languages, you realise that this King's community, they love to give permission to people to express their dreams of bringing life and generosity in any way that they can. The leadership of the church are not gatekeepers, but are permission givers for every sort of ministry, for every sort of effort made to express the love of God, because they recognise that God is always doing a new thing. And that's why the King's community is recognised as truly a city on a hill, an example of how to engage meaningfully as a faith community with your surrounding neighbourhood. Because this people, us people, we are here. We see ourselves as a sent people, with a lot of us who live here sent locally, but with some of us sent internationally, expressing the heart of Jesus and the values of the King's community in places like Cambodia, in Africa. There's a place for everyone. So can you imagine? Can you imagine? Can you see yourself somewhere? So as you consider this proposal and get excited, may you continue to imagine, and may you, friends, go with this blessing, that Almighty God will make you faithful to his calling, cheerful in his service, and fruitful for his kingdom. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit be upon you and through you to those whom he sends you, now and always. And all his people said, amen. Grace and peace, folks. Thank you so much for your attention. Have a great weekend, and we look forward to continuing this journey with you.